made many contributions to the field of sociology. He is especially well known for his studies concerning the subject of social change, and in this area he is widely known as the originator of the hypothesis of cultural lag. Much interest has been attached to this hypothesis since he first stated it in 1922, and it is thought that many people would be interested to hear observations on cultural lag in the latter 1950s made by the originator of the concept. It is therefore a great privilege and pleasure to introduce to you Professor William F. Ogburn. Professor Ogburn.
I shall begin with a definition. A cultural lag occurs when one of two parts of our culture or social heritage, which are correlated, changes before or in greater degree than the other part does, thereby causing less adjustment between the two parts than existed previously. An illustration is the lag in the construction of highways for automobile traffic. The two parts in this illustration are the automobile and the highway. These two parts of our social heritage were in relatively good adjustment in 1910, when the automobile was slow and when the highways were country roads with curves and sharp bends over which had been poured a large pressure. The automobile traveled at not too great a rate of speed and could take the turn without much trouble or danger to the driver. It was essentially a vehicle for local transportation. But as time went on, the first part, that is to say the automobile, which is called in the theory an independent variable, underwent many changes, particularly the engine, which developed speed capable of 70 and 80 miles an hour with brakes that could stop the car relatively quickly. But the narrow highways with sharp bends did not change as soon as did the automobile. On these roads, the driver must slow up or have resulting accidents. A decade or more later, we are building a few broad highways with gentle curves which will make the automobile a vehicle for long-distance travel. The highways, this dependent variable, are not adapted to the new automobiles, so that there is a maladjustment between the highways and the automobile. This maladjustment, as measured by speed, was less for local transportation in 1910 than it is for long-distance travel on the roads at present. The adjustment will be better on the new express highways. Since the adjustment is made by the dependent variable, it is also called adaptive culture. The concept of cultural lag, just defined and illustrated, was first published in 1922 in a book on social change, in a chapter which carries the title, The Hypothesis of the Cultural Lag. I was not sure whether this term would be understood, so I asked my colleague, Lee McBain, then Dean of the Faculty of Political Science at Columbia University, whether he thought it was an appropriate title. He advised me, with a twinkle in his eye, not to use it, for, he said, it might be mistaken for a dance step. This was in the 1920s, when new types of dances in the nightclubs of the Prohibition era were very popular. However, I did use the term, and I note with interest that it now appears in the dictionary and is in use in several countries in different parts of the world, and has in the United States been found particularly useful by historians. There is some interest always in the origin of an invention and in how ideas develop. It therefore seems appropriate that I discuss briefly how this theory of the cultural lag was first observed and developed. I am happy to discuss its origin, since I have been accused by some of taking the theory from Thorstein Veblen and by others from Karl Marx. I am quite sure that there was no direct taking over of the idea from Veblen, because I had never read him on that point. I had read Marx, of course, but his materialistic interpretation of history was well known to social scientists and historians in general. This idea, though, of the economic interpretation of history was a base, however, from which the theory of cultural lag was developed. But certainly the materialistic interpretation of history, nor economic determinism, is the same as cultural lag. I first used the term in 1914 when I was a professor of economics and sociology at Reed College. I had for a long time been impressed with the materialistic interpretation of history, though as a user of partial correlation techniques, I was appreciative of its limitations. The economic interpretation of history may be illustrated by the Crusades in the Middle Ages for the recovery of the Holy Land from the infidels, which were claimed to be the product not of religious motives, but resulting from the search for trade routes to the east. This economic drive for greater trade with the Orient utilized the religious flavor of the time for the purpose of enlistment of recruits and of money. I do not wish to discuss the validity of this economic interpretation in this instance, but rather to note that there was an economic factor in the Crusades, and that this economic factor was obscured or disguised. This word disguise was widely current in the early part of the 20th century because of the influence of Sigmund Freud, all of whose writings I had read at that time. In his book, The Interpretation of Dreams, he called the dream, as recalled by the dreamer, the manifest content, and the interpretation he called the latent content. The manifest content was a disguise of the latent content. Thus, if a person dreamed that a steamroller was about to roll over him, that would be the manifest content. But if the interpretation showed that the steamroller was a symbol or a dominating follower, that would be the latent content. The latent content was thus obscured. About this time, I read a paper before the American Economic Association stressing this point of disguise, which was entitled The Psychological Basis for the Economic Interpretation of History, claiming in this paper that the economic factor in history and in social movements was oftentimes disguised as the latent content is disguised in the dream. But as I thought more about it, the disguise factor in social causation seemed less important than the time factor. I noticed this time factor particularly in unequal rates of change in a course that I was giving at the time on the family. I remarked that there were many changes taking place in the family, and that most of these seemed to be due to the economic factor, which removed production such as spinning, weaving, soap making, and the tanning of leather from the household and put them in factories, thus taking away many household duties from the wife. Yet the ideology of the position of the housewife persisted. It was said that woman's place was in the home. At the beginning of the 20th century, there was serious discussion as to whether women should be permitted to go to college because their place was supposed to be in the home. I was impressed with the fact that the transfer of production from the home to the factory was precipitating a new locale for women outside the home. But there was a great time interval. That is to say, there was a lag in the changing position of women, and I came to see great importance in this lag. Being active at that time in various social reform movements, I was disturbed about the maladjustment in the position of women who were kept at home. I was an ardent feminist, so both lag and maladjustment impressed me. I should like to digress for a moment and say that I do not consider all delays in taking up a new idea as being a lag. For instance, I have been told that Queen Mary of England, who died in 1953, had never used a telephone in her life. Well, she certainly delayed in adopting a new invention, but the failure to adopt a new invention is a delay, but not a cultural lag. The theory of the cultural lag is more complex. It calls for the following steps. One, the identification of at least two variables. Two, the demonstration that these two variables were in adjustment. Three, the determination by dates that one variable has changed while the other has not changed or has changed in a greater degree than the other. And four, that when one variable has changed earlier and in a greater degree than the other, there is a less satisfactory adjustment than existed before. I call attention to this series of steps in the formulation of the theory of cultural lag because it has sometimes been commented that the cultural lag is merely a concept. It is, however, surely a much more elaborate concept than, say, that of the primary group or that of social distance. I think it is better to say that since it is a concept of relationship, that it is, in reality, a theory. It is therefore more than merely a new term in the language. This theory I fully developed in 1915, but I hesitated to publish it because I thought that theories should have some proof before publication. In order to prove a theory, one must set it up in a form that can be proved, with spaces and place for the relevant data used in the proof. Thus, for proof, a theory evolved into a hypothesis. But the war came along, and it was only after the war that I took up the verification of this hypothesis by considering the adjustment of the law to industrial accidents in the United States, which were increasing because of the introduction of whirling machinery and rapidly moving wheels. In this case, the independent variable was technology, the machinery of which, before the factory system, had been simple tools such as those found in early farm life, to which the common law of accidents was very well adjusted. But after the coming of factories in the United States, around 1870, accidents continued to be dealt with by the old common law and with much maladjustment. For where workers suffered loss of life or injury to a limb, there was little compensation and much delay in paying for these disasters to the individual or to his family. It was not until about 1910 that employers' liability and workmen's compensation laws were adopted in this country, so that there was a lag of 30 or 40 years when the maladjustment could be measured by inadequate provision for several 100,000 injuries and deaths, to which there would have been a better adjustment if we had had laws of employers' liability and workmen's compensation. I still considered it a hypothesis, however, because we needed more proof than one particular case. I attempted, though, to cite many hypotheses of cultural lag, and in nearly all cases, the independent variable proved to be a scientific discovery or mechanical invention. For instance, the invention of the steam engine led to the factory, and only afterwards the change in the legal rights of women. Most of the illustrations given at this time were initiated by technological changes and scientific discoveries, and the lagging adaptive culture was generally some social organization or ideology. These illustrations led to a characterization of the theory of cultural lag as a technological interpretation of history. I stated, however, at the time that the hypothesis of cultural lag was published that the independent variable could very well be an ideology or a non-technological variable. For instance, changes in the law of primogeniture, an independent variable, was a change in the legal system and not in the technology. Changes in the law of primogeniture were accompanied after a lag by changes in the economic system related to agriculture and household production, so that the fact that technological changes came place was simple observation of a temporal nature. For instance, it is quite probable that religion and not technology was the cause of most social changes in India 2,500 years ago at about the time that Buddha lived. Also, students of Stone Age techniques have pointed out the essential conservative nature of stone technology, that it was very resistant to change, and that probably the causes of changes then were ideological or social. But in our time in the Western world, technology and science are the great prime movers of social change. That this is so is an almost universal observation. I did attempt to generalize the theory. It is this: a cultural lag is independent of the nature of the initiating part or of the lagging part, provided that they are interconnected. The independent variable may be technological, economic, political, ideological, or whatnot. But when the unequal time and degree of change produces a strain on the interconnected part, or expressed differently, where the correlation is lessened, then it is called a cultural lag. The extent of the generalized applicability of the theory rests on how much interconnection exists among the parts of our social heritage. That many connections exist is obvious. Religion is interrelated with science, family is correlated with education, education and industry have connections, highways are necessary for automobiles. On the other hand, some interrelations are slight and do not exist at all between the parts. painting is not related to the production of gasoline. And I was about to say that writing poetry is unrelated to aviation, but I recall seeing a sizable book of collected poems on aviation. To the extent, then, that culture is like a machine with parts that fit, cultural lag is widespread. If, however, the parts of social heritage are no more related than pebbles thrown upon the beach, then cultural lags are rare. There must, of course, be change occurring at equal time intervals. An indication that cultural lags are common phenomena is suggested by the incorporation of the theory in the books of general sociology. There have been criticisms, however. One in particular should be noted. It has been said that the hypothesis of cultural lag is not a scientific instrument because, it is said, it cannot be scientifically demonstrated. The reason why, the critics claim, is that maladjustments are not objectively determined because there is a subjective factor which exists because of value judgment, and thus judgments are not subject to measurement. Values are truly difficult to rank or to measure. We can measure the temperature by a thermometer, but it is said we cannot measure the goodness and morals. This observation does not invalidate the hypothesis of cultural lag. It only concerns the difficulty of determining degrees of maladjustment. But of course, many maladjustments are quite demonstrable, irrespective of the value system. Maladjustment was, for instance, an essential factor in Darwin's theory of evolution, and he had no difficulty in proving maladjustment because he used death as a test. But there are other tests. Sickness is another test, so is insanity. Furthermore, maladjustment may be conceived as deviations from a social norm. Certainly social norms can be described and measured, and deviations also. Even though maladjustment be difficult to demonstrate, and even though we fail to show it in some cases, it can be proven in many cases, and the hypothesis of cultural lag is not invalidated. The application of the theory to modern times suggests a possible appendix to the theory which runs like this. The number of patents and discoveries in applied science and inventions have been increasing in something like an exponential curve. Most of these are minor, but important ones are coming very rapidly. As, for instance, the magnification of light, or the putting of vision on tape, or the isotopes of nuclear fission. As these discoveries and inventions were adopted, we must adjust to them. We must adapt ourselves to this changing environment, which we do with a certain amount of lag. So an addendum to the theory of cultural lag is that lags accumulate because of the great rapidity and volume of technological change. However, there are events that tend to cause cultural lag to crumble. One of these, I pointed out in my book, Social Change, is revolution. And the stories we get from the revolutionary movement in China in the 1950s indicate that there are many lags having to do with the family, rural life, and Confucianism overwhelmed by the revolution. For instance, the feudal system has been overthrown. Observation closer at home is that war causes a decline in the pile of accumulated lag. For instance, Negroes have been differentiated into upper classes, middle classes, professional groups, and it becomes obvious that the whites cannot treat these upper class educated Negroes in the same way in which they formerly treated Negro field hands as domestic servants. Yet many Negroes in the 20th century, with the middle and upper classes, are being treated as they were in villages of the South as they emerged from slavery shortly after the Civil War. But the war broke down some of these old lags because it put Negroes into association on the basis of equality with whites in the Army and Navy, and the Negroes were drawn into the cities of the North. So war tends to break down the cultural lag, though it may preserve a few. This is a matter of empirical observation. Even though war and revolution are breaking down cultural lag, there are many that persist. For instance, one such cultural lag is demonstrable in regard to our foreign policy. In the 18th century, the advice of President Washington to avoid entangling alliances with foreign powers was very appropriate because of our isolation, because of the abundance of our natural resources, and because of slow transportation. But in the 20th century, there has come the airplane, the fast steamboat, the radio, the telephone, and also the search for raw materials which are used in our industries and which are widely but unequally distributed over the world. The foreign policy of isolation is a maladjustment to the changed technological situation. Another illustration, which I think is clearly demonstrable, has to do with the death rates and the birth rates and their relation to the increase in population, particularly in Southeast Asia. Throughout the great period of human history, the birth rate and the death rates have tended to be the same, except for intermittent periods when the death rate fell and the birth rate stayed high. When that occurs, there was, of course, an increase in population, such as occurring now in India, where the birth rate probably is 35 per 1,000 population, while the death rate is about 25. The result is the increase in the population of India of 4 million per year, occurring in an agricultural country where the farms have an average acreage of about 3 acres. This pressure of population upon the food supply will bring hardship and may result in great human tragedies and certainly make it difficult for the standard of living to be raised. And I wanted to mention one other lag, and that is the lag in adjusting to the atomic bomb. The atomic bomb brought the possibility of destruction to our cities in war. The atomic bomb was produced in 2.5 years. Yet 10 years later, we have developed no defense against the atomic bomb, nor have we made adjustments either in the dispersion of the urban population, or in controlling atomic energy, or to the prohibition of the manufacture of atomic bombs. Probably many decades may pass before adjustments will come. The lag of very great danger. If there were time, dozens of cultural lags causing serious problems could be listed, lags which arise largely because inventions and technology have increased in volume and rapidity faster than we are making our adaptations to them. The great need of our time is to reduce these lags. Cultural lags are one characteristic description of the process of social evolution, which occurs in a closely integrated society in a period of rapid change.
A person most prominently identified with the study of social trends in the United States is Professor William F. Ogburn of the University of Chicago. Professor Ogburn was Director of Research of President Hoover's Committee on Social Trends, which published the notable volumes entitled Recent Social Trends in the United States in 1933. Since that time, he has made and supervised many studies of social trends. It is a great privilege and pleasure to introduce to you Professor William F. Ogburn.
The expression social trends has only recently come into our scientific and popular vocabulary. What does it mean? Originally, the word trend meant a river, that is, the direction which a river takes. Later, it was used to describe the course of which events take. But before the term came into the present-day usage, the idea was expressed by other terms. One such was social movements, as, for instance, the women's suffrage movement or the trade unions movement. In more general terms, history sometimes meant trends, as, for instance, the history of prison reform. Though such a history may have emphasized persons and events to the neglect of trends. For a time, sociologists called such a history natural history, thus de-emphasizing heroes and great events and stressing processes. Again, the word evolution, another word, was used to describe trends, as for instance in a study on the evolution of the Supreme Court. But it implied more, this word evolution did, in that it carried the suggestion of improvement. Thus, the phenomenon of social trends has had various expressions. Is the term social trend an improvement over the old expressions, or is it merely another label? There are several ways which show that it is a better term. It is more precise, which makes it better fitted for scientific usage, as I shall proceed to show. Trends came into the scientific usage with the application of statistics and curve fitting to data which had been reported regularly in the past, as for instance annually. This usage occurred in the first and second decades of the 20th century. An illustration is the production of pig iron, which was reported annually over a period of many years. Such annual data were called a time series. In the United States, the amount of pig iron produced increased as time went by, though there were brief periods when it decreased, as in a business depression or a strike, or when the increase was less than at other periods, such as a war or preparation for war. If annual pig iron production is plotted as upright bars on graph paper, the succeeding bars are in general taller than the preceding ones, though there will be exceptions, for the production of pig iron varies from year to year. When a line is fitted through the tops of these bars by the method of least squares, and therefore runs through the middle of them, this line is called a trend line, and in the case of pig iron production, it is seen to move upward because pig iron production was increasing over the years. One of the reasons for drawing a trend line was to show the annual fluctuations above and below it. In this illustration, these fluctuations indicated ups and downs of business conditions, and so fluctuations around certain economic trend lines were used as measures of business cycles. To measure business prosperity and depression, it was necessary to measure them from a trend line. So the trend must be determined exactly. A trend, as has been said, is like the course of a river, which is likely to be in one direction, which there are various exceptions. Thus, the Mississippi River flows southward from Minnesota into the Gulf of Mexico. But there are many bends and curves in the Mississippi River around its general trend. The scientific nature of the study of social trends is shown by the fact that accounts of trends are impersonal and without the dramatic coloring of heroic personalities and human bias. Nor does the term have any necessary moral implications. Thus, when the trend of marriage is increasing, or when the trend of birth rates is downward, these are impersonal statements of facts, without any suggestions of progress or the reverse. Though, of course, they may be interpreted as good or bad. To some, a decreasing birth rate is regretted. To others, it is desirable. But the trend line itself does not say which. Having been accepted in science, the word trend became the possession of the people shortly thereafter. An event that helped to give it a widespread acceptance was the publication in 1933 of a series of studies made by the President's Committee on Social Trends, appointed by President Herbert Hoover in 1929. The publication of these studies, called Recent Social Trends, were distributed widely and found frequent use by students in colleges and high schools. They became standard reference books in the library. Not all of these studies were based on statistics, with trend lines measured, as was the case, for instance, in the volume on population. Measurement was used where quantitative data were available, as, for instance, in the publication of the series on crime and on education and on the family. In some areas, quantitative data was scarce or missing, as in the studies of religion and of government. Where data were unavailable, the concept of trend lines was valuable nevertheless, even though the study was in non-quantitative descriptive terms. Thus, trends in religion, say in secularization, would be downward, though they could be described even though they could not be measured. Such descriptions are not, though, as precise as those based on measurement. Yet, such approximations are useful. Thus, we may speak truthfully of trends in painting, or in music, or in dancing, based upon verbal description and illustration without any statistics whatsoever. It is verbal description rather than statistical description that has made possible the popular use of the term social trends. We may say that the trend in rearing of children is toward less discipline without knowing any statistical measurement, but relying upon impressions or descriptive illustrations. When there is no statistical measurement, there is, however, danger of misstatement about trends which are based upon impressions and illustrations. Who can say, for instance, without statistics, whether there is a trend toward increasing church attendance or not? Another danger in the loose usage of the term trends lies in the difficulty of distinguishing a fluctuation around a trend from a trend itself. For instance, is the recent increase in the birth rate a new trend in the birth rate, or is this increase merely a fluctuation around a downward trend in the birth rates which has been going on for a century and a half in this country and which may continue downward during the remainder of the century? It is difficult to say. The answer, I think, depends upon how long a time is needed to determine a trend or a fluctuation around a trend. How long a time is required to call a movement, as for instance in the stock market, a trend? 5 years, 15 years, or 50 years? In the case of suicides, I have heard it said that the trend was downward on the basis of a decrease in suicides over a period of 1 year. The person who made this remark evidently was not aware of the difference between a trend and a fluctuation around a trend. 1 year is too short a time to determine a trend in data reported annually. As to how long it takes, the general practice is not to determine a trend until there have been several cycles of fluctuations in the time series around which the trend line will be. A cycle is a fluctuation, I may say, from above a trend line to below and then up again to above. A trend line is more stable if it is constructed say for 5 or 6 or more cycles. If a cycle averages 3 years, then the period required would be at least 15 years. Not many statistical trends exist for more than 50 or 75 years. For earlier statistical reporting, a mini-series did not exist. And in some cases, we know trends have existed for many centuries, even though we have no measurement. Thus, the trend of scientific research has been upward for 400 years. In the case of temperature, to determine any trend upward or downward may require time measured in thousands of years rather than in hundreds. Yet to some, a couple of extra cold winters coming together is enough to establish a trend. And we are told on the basis of so short a time that the Earth is getting colder and that a new ice age is on the way. These remarks I have just made show the scientific nature of the concept of social trends. Such a scientific term is readily diffused among the people because ours is a scientific age, and the average man in the street is accustomed to scientific speech, from physicians, from architects, from farmers, from automobile mechanics, and from gardeners. It seems that everyone wants to be scientific, even preachers and painters and poets. A very important characteristic of social trends I discovered several years ago, but which I have never published. It is that social trends seldom change their direction quickly and sharply. This is a very simple statement, but the implications are profound. But first, let me present the evidence. I searched the records of America and Europe and found some 300 time series reaching back several decades from the fields of production, marketing, finance, population, vital statistics, transportation, government, and various other social phenomena. To these 300 time series, I fitted trend lines. An examination of these trend lines showed that over 90% of them continued their course without any quick or marked change in direction. A quick change was one that occurred in, let us say, 10, 15, or 20 years. The replacement of the horse-drawn vehicle by the automobile did not occur quickly. Even the trend in immigration to the United States did not change quickly, though legislation restricting it was passed quite quickly indeed. Some of the changes which I found that occurred suddenly and radically were from England during the war. When the causes for this persistence of a trend on its course are examined theoretically, there are several reasons which make us think that more cases than the 300 would have corroborated the finding based upon only 300. In other words, a theoretical examination of causes leads us to think that the finding is universal. I regret that I do not have the time now to set forth this examination of causes. There is one use of this discovery that is of great significance. It is that the projection of a trend line into the future has some trustworthiness. It tells us with some degree of probability what the future will be. This property of a trend line is due to the fact that it seldom changes its direction sharply. This guidance as to its future course is only good, of course, within limits. Hence, it does not pinpoint the future precisely. Thus, a projection of a trend line of population change in the United States into the future may not predict exactly the population 20 years from now, but even if the projection missed it by 10 or 15 million either way, there is an error of only 5 or 6%. But in any case, there is assurance that the population will continue to increase during the next 20 years, and it will not suddenly begin to decrease. Of course, if an atomic war should destroy our cities, such a sudden reversal might occur. In the case of population, I may remark parenthetically, there are other ways of making forecasts than projecting trend lines. 3 cautions should be observed in extending trend lines. One is that the past trend should be of some duration. Thus, in the projection of the future passenger miles flown by airlines, it is desirable to have enough data to establish a trend. Otherwise, a record of a few years is not enough, and the error is great. The second point to be observed is that the further the projection is made, the greater is the error. Thus, the error in the projection of the increase in per capita income to the year 2000 is greater than the projection to the year 1975. The third observation is that the projection of trend lines into the future is not a forecast of what the time series, as contrasted to the trend, will actually be. It is only a forecast of what the trend will be, and not what the fluctuations around the trend lines will be. Thus, a trend line of the national income to 1960 may not indicate, even for so short a time as 4 years, what the actual national income will be. For there may be a business depression which would bring the fluctuation of national income well below what the trend line will be in 1960. Thus, the projection of the trend of national income may forecast $350 billion exactly. But even if this be an exact prediction of the trend for 1960, the actual national income might be only $325 billion if there's a business depression. Where exact forecasts are needed, as for instance in the airplane industry, that is purchasing transportation planes for future use and planning schedules and seeking capital, the projection of trend lines does not meet the requirements. But there are probably thousands of instances where great exactness is not needed. In these instances, projections of trends may yield as much information as we really care about. For instance, to build a new city hall, it is not necessary to know the exact population of the city in 1985. Nor in building an express highway is it necessary to know the precise number of automobiles that will pass over it in 1970. Since so much of knowledge desired about the future need not be exact as to quantity, nor precise as to date, trend lines can be very useful. Also, often in this uncertain world, we act upon plans whose probability of materializing is less than 95 out of 100. In projecting trends, probabilities, though not 1, that is 10 out of 10, are often high, say of the order of 9 out of 10. We conclude our remarks with 2 thoughts on the meaning for us of our knowledge of social trends. The first general message that knowledge of social trends brings to us is that there is much stability in society, even though there be a period of great and rapid social change. This knowledge gives us a feeling of confidence that our habitation is not built upon shifting sands. It means a sense of certainty that revolutions are rare and that evolution is the rule. With this knowledge, there should be dispelled the fear that the bottom will drop out of things. And we do not have the same comfort in social trends that the religionist has in the Rock of Ages. Even so, there is some comfort in knowing that social trends are essentially stable, like, let us say, the climate. though in the long run they do change, and will, as is well known from history. The second lesson we learn from our knowledge of social trends is that there is a sort of inevitability about social trends. Inevitability is perhaps too strong a word, yet our evidence indicates that an individual is not likely by his own effort to change the direction of a social trend quickly, nor very much. No individual or group is likely to stop the trend toward Planned Parenthood, or the trend toward big business, or the extension of governmental functions, or the increasing employment of women outside the home. A knowledge of trends tends to keep us from believing in fairy tales and myths. It is really difficult to buck a social trend. It may be slowed up a bit, but generally a social trend continues on its course. It should be realized that if a social trend is to be opposed successfully, even temporarily, a mighty effort is required. For instance, to slow the trend of the movement of city dwellers out of the city to the suburbs, city chambers of commerce will have a very hard time with it, and are likely not to be successful for long. Even a Winston Churchill could not stop the trend in the breakup of the British Empire. Success is more likely to come to those who work for and will a social trend than to those who work against it. There is, for instance, a trend toward nationalism in Asia and in Africa. Success is more likely to come to Russia if she works with this trend than is likely to come to the colonial powers of Europe who work against it. This lesson might well be heeded by the government of the United States. It may be argued that we should wait for principles and not for trends, whether these principles be with social trends or against them. This position can be well defended. But should our principles dictate that we work against social trends, we would do well to appraise the size of the effort needed unless we wish to be martyrs. The same lesson should be heeded by city and national planners. They should not start with a utopian urge, a clean slate, and a belief in the unlimited potentialities of human willpower. Rather, they should see clearly what the trends are. Only then can they approach realistically their task of planning. As the materials which the architect works with are stone and steel, brick and glass, the materials which the statesman works with are social trends.
Thank you very much, Professor Ogburn. The changing social environment is a fascinating subject to sociologists, and many of the latter have been especially interested in the impact of technology on this environment. This is particularly so in our modern age of high-speed airplanes, of the use of nuclear power, and of miraculous achievements in electronics and in many other fields. Professor William S. Ogburn of the University of Chicago is a distinguished and leading authority on the influence of technology upon society. He has emphasized the great social influence of inventions and discovery in many volumes as recent social trends, social effects of aviation, technology in international relations, sociology, and technology in the changing family, the latter two written with Professor Meyer Nimkoff. It is appropriate in the latter 1950s to have a searching appraisal of our modern technological environment. It is therefore an especially important occasion to hear Professor William F. Ogburn speak on the subject, Technology as Environment. Professor Ogburn.
An amusing pastime is to visit a zoo and to guess the natural environment in which the animals lived before it was penned up in a cage. The warm coat of the penguin suggests a cold climate, and the big bodies of the bison indicate an area with plenty of vegetation. Without any close examination, though, one might not guess that Satan's sheep were dwellers of steep rocky mountainside. Biologists, of course, could make a much more precise delineation of the habitat of an animal than a casual visitor to the zoo. The key to success in this guessing game is the idea of adjustment between the animal and its environment, a concept which Charles Darwin has immortalized. Indeed, environment can be defined as something to which animals and plants adjust. The environment to which plants and animals are adjusted we call natural environment. And we think of it in terms of temperature, altitude, precipitation, atmosphere, soil, water, light, darkness, and other animals and vegetation. But there are other environments. For instance, there is a social environment. Many insects and higher animals live in groups, as do bees, termites, wolves, cattle, apes, and notably human animals. Thus, men adjust to their environment as a community as well as to nature. The social environment is in addition to the natural environment. I am now to introduce you to still another environment, for man at least, namely technology. That is, the material products of technology. And when I speak of technology as environment, I mean, of course, the objects of technology. The word technology is used loosely, though not carelessly, to comprise the applications of scientific discovery and the material products of technology. In short, it includes the objects of material culture. Thus, a technological environment consists of such fabricated objects as buildings, vehicles, processed foods, clothing, machines, ships, laboratories, books, and so forth. As an illustration, an urban employee working with the machines in a factory is working in a technological environment. A technological environment is not so exclusive. Such an employee is working also in a social environment, for he interacts with his fellow employees and employers. He is also working in a natural environment, since he is working in nature's air and light, moisture and pressure. Environment, as first thought of, is seen as a sort of envelopment, a mere totality in which a man is immersed. Thus, a man in a factory is surrounded by technologically produced objects. A wild animal is surrounded by nature. With these enveloping environments, a living animal or plant must be in a relationship to the environment that is more or less harmonious. This harmonious relationship is to the whole environment. However, an environment consists of parts. That is, it is made up of elements such as trees, water, houses, food, and so forth. Man's adjustment to environment is more appropriately viewed as an adjustment to the various elements that compose the environment. Particularly is his maladjustment seen in reference to some particular element in the environment. Thus, an animal from the tropics is maladjusted to the cold of the Arctic. people have died for lack of vitamin C, or because of so small an object as the proboscis of the Anopheles, carrying an even smaller object, protozoans, that produce malarial fever. Animals adjust as well as maladjust to small elements in the environment. Thus, tens of thousands of sheep have perished for want of cobalt in their water or food. And they become adjusted when 1 part of cobalt is added to 200,000 parts of intake of water or food. And they have thus become adjusted to the grazing lands where there was no trace of cobalt. So in thinking of our technological environment, it is well to think of it in terms of the individual elements to which we adjust. Thus the tin can is an invention of a century ago to which we adjust by processing foods in factories instead of in the family kitchen, and by the housewife spending more of her time elsewhere than in the home. The technological elements are many, counted in the millions, compared to, though not so numerous, as the elements in our natural environment. They also vary greatly in size, from, say, needles to a skyscraper office building. A large object like a skyscraper, however, may not bring about as much adjustment on our part as does the tiny needle. The extent of the adjusting we do to a technological element is not closely related to its physical size, nor is the complexity of an element of technology an indication of the amount of adjusting we may make to, as for instance, the electronic digital computer that performs seemingly magical functions of an electrical brain, as compared with the adjusting we do to so simple an invention as the wheel. We have been using the expression the amount of adjusting. That there are degrees of adjustment may appear strange to those who derive their concept of adjustment from biology, where the measure of adjustment is life and death. But the extent of adjustment varies, especially in human individuals. Being sick is not as good an adjustment as being well. A neurotic has a less satisfactory adjustment than does a normal person. The word adaptation implies variation more than does the word adjustment. Thus, varying degrees of adaptation are suggested by such terms as strain, tension, nervousness, vitality, energy, illness, and strength. Another extension of the meaning of adjustment is necessary to make at this time when such a term is taken from biology and adapted to humans living in communities. In biology, we think of an individual as living or dying because of adjustment or lack of it, or of an aggregation of individuals living and dying. But with humans, aggregations are societies, and their group life is characterized by various institutions such as schools, families, churches, states, clubs, economic and political organizations. When humans adjust in groups to environment, as well as by individuals, their group adjustment implies changes in social activities, such as those of religion, education, marriage, political, and productive occupation. The lower animals have no schools and no churches, no parliaments and no factories. Well, the lower animals live in groups. Their group adaptation is not generally different from the adaptation of a group of plants. In either case, group adaptation to an environment is something like the arithmetic sum of the adaptations of a collection of individuals. But with humans, the adjustment of a collection of individuals is an adjustment of their group life and may mean an adjustment of their schools, factories, parliaments, and churches. In other words, with mankind, adjustment to environment means more than life and death of an aggregation of individuals. It means degrees of adaptation of social institutions and customs. Thus, when we added a steam engine to our technological environment and applied mechanical power to our tools instead of muscle, we worked in large buildings called factories instead of in the family dwellings. Hence our adjustment to this technological element, steam engine, meant an adjustment of the institution of the family and also of our economic institutions. One of the earliest technological elements in our environment was the instrument that produced fire by friction. Before the acquisition of fire, the habitat of early man was Africa and southern Asia. He could not go outside this area because of the cold and the shortage of fruits. But when fire was used in cooking, the hard, indigestible fibers of many plants and leaves were made edible. So he migrated to different parts of the world. By migration, his food supplies could be increased greatly, and he could live outside the semi-tropics. Thus, the adaptation to fire was migration, and men thus were spread more widely over the earth than any other animal. For hundreds of thousands of years, men were wanderers within a generally large or limited area. The little band of humans would eat out a locality out of its supply of animals and wild plants, and then move on to fresh food supplies. Then there was added to technological environment the most important implement, a digging stick, with which he would dig holes in the ground, drop in seeds, cover them, and then dig away the weeds from the growing plant. This digging stick was a simple tool, a hard stick with a point of flattened blade-like end, as in a small spade, or a stick with a joint at the end which suggests a hole. Yet the adjustment to this simple digging stick was profound. It changed a wandering band of a dozen or more individuals to a more or less settled community of several scores of inhabitants. This was quite a change in the social life of man. Various sociologists in the past have written of the influence of natural environment in our social life, but strangely few have studied the influence of technological environment. As the hoe involved into the plow, food was raised from seeds of grasses, notably barley, oats, wheat, and rice, all of which could be preserved longer than fruit. And animal food, particularly milk, was produced from tamed or domestic animals. This increased food supply based on technology made possible communities much larger than were possible in the Hoare digging stick culture. Villages of several thousand inhabitants became possible where the climate and the soil were suitable. But in general, the early villages were smaller than these. These early agriculturalists lived compactly in villages and went out to cultivate their fields some distance and to tend their flocks far away. But as the thickly cultivated plants annually took out of the soil chemical elements important for the growth of plant food, the soil became less fertile, and the villagers with their plows, their domesticated animals, and their seed moved on to seek new fields. To find these lands, they often cut and burned the forest as they came in contact with peoples living in these forests by hunting and gathering wild food. They either killed them, conquered them, and married them, or imposed their cultures on them, so that the world became peopled by agriculturalists rather than by hunters and gatherers of wild foods. The adjustment to the technology of agriculture led to the replacement of hunting peoples and to larger communities. These adaptations I have just recounted, namely migration, increase in population, and stability of residents, are only the immediate adjustments that come directly from the uses of these technological elements. But the group adjustments did not stop with these direct uses. Social adjustment to technological environment is more complex than the adjustment of lower animals, as the biologists record only in life and death. Group adjustment to a technological element is made only in a few customs and institutions, and not to the totality of them in a single society. The first adaptations are those coming from direct uses. But to these changed customs and institutions coming directly from their uses, secondary or direct or indirect or derivative adjustments are in turn made. Thus, the first direct adjustment to the technology that increases the food supply and makes it more assured from season to season and from year to year is a larger population. But the adjustment in turn to a large population may be a greater division of labor, a specialization of occupation, different religious ceremonies, or a differentiation of societies into age groups, or even the creation of social classes. These are derivative adaptations to the original direct adaptation to the technological innovation. The original direct adaptation to a change in some element or part of society, which we may call A. A, then, is adjusted to T, the technological innovation. But in a society, there are other parts or elements than A, as, for instance, B, C, D, and so forth. These other elements, B, C, D, and so forth, may be interconnected with A. Hence, B, C, D, and so forth adapt to the new adaptation of A, which has resulted from an adaptation to T. Getting away from this alphabetical illustration, we note that men adjust, let us say, to the steam engine by letting it drive their tools for them. They thus work away from home in factories. Then the family, a social institution, adjusts to the absence of workers and to the new production and to the additional source of income. The adjustment in the family is, for instance, the decline in the authority of the husband and father, the removal of economic activities from the home, the separation of husband and wife, and the different types of education for the children. These are not the direct adaptations to the steam engine, but are adaptations to the uses of the steam-driven tools away from the homestead. These derivative or indirect adaptations to technological elements in our environment are not usually recognized or appreciated. Many sociologists are primarily interested in description, more so than in causes. And when they search for causes, They look only for the direct cause and not for the derivative causes. Causes are like links in a chain and occur in succession. A sequence may begin with an adjustment A to technological element T, but B, another adjustment in another element of society, is seen as an adjustment to A and not to T. The decline in the authority of the husband and father in the family is not interpreted generally as an adjustment to the steam engine, but only an adjustment to the transfer of production away from the home, which was in turn an adjustment to the steam engine. The most numerous adjustments to a technological environment are the derivative ones. For any one direct adaptation to a technological element creates a change in a custom or an institution to which several other customs and institutions will adjust. But commonly, the derivative adjustments are not seen as adjustments to the technological element in the first instance. However, there are some reports which have been made of both direct and derivative adjustments to a technological element. Ralph Linton has studied the adjustment made in Tanara to the technology of the wet cultivation of rice. Formerly in Tanara, the people cultivated dry rice, which required a large or joint family to do so. But under wet cultivation, a single family instead of a joint family did the work, and the village became permanent. The displaced families moved off into the jungle to seek new fields. But the kinship ties of the joint family held, and a tribal organization developed through intermarriage. With increased wealth and property came kings, warfare, and slaves. Similarly, in several different parts of the world, the adjustment to cattle raising has led to increased stealing, to war, to slavery, and to the creation of a nobility. The most extensive adaptations to a technological environment are not to a single element, but to a cluster of elements. Thus, cities, one of the most remarkable of social inventions, were a dramatic community adjustment to three basic technological clusters of elements. A, an agricultural technology which enables a farm family to feed more than its members, and thus to sell food to the city people. B, a transportation technology which would bring food into the city and goods exchanged therefore out of the city. And C, the tools and machines of manufacture. With cities, as all sociologists know, came radical changes in many customs and many associations. So the modern family in the United States and in Western Europe is also an adaptation to a cluster of technological and scientific elements, namely to three: the steam engine, contraceptives, and the scientific discoveries affecting religion. Also, religious beliefs have made extensive adaptations to scientific discoveries, which have affected the forms of belief in regard to miracles, healing, life after death, the locations of heaven and hell, and creation. The technological environment in modern times differs from natural environment in that it changes more rapidly. Natural environment has changed. For 4 different times, northern Europe and America have been covered with glaciers, but these glaciers came and went by only a few feet of movement a year, whereas in modern times they have come within a couple of centuries: the steam engine, the internal combustion engine, the dynamo, and now the atomic reactor. The railroad, the automobile, the airplane, and now the guided missiles have come in equally as short a time. Quite as rapid has been the advent of the telephone, radio, motion picture, television, microfilm, and now the tape recorder, which records visions on magnetic tape. Unlike the natural environment, the technological environment is a huge mass in rapid motion. It is no wonder then that our society, with its numerous institutions and organizations, had an almost impossible task in adjusting to this whirling technological environment. It should be no surprise to the sociologists that the various forms and shapes which our social institutions take, and the many shifts in their institutions, are the results of adjustments not to a changing natural environment, not as a result of a changing biological heritage, but as adaptations to a changing technological environment.
Thank you very much, Professor Ogburn.